Psalm 34:18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Have you ever reached that moment when the noise of the world fades, and all that's left is the sound of your own soul breaking? It was autumn when Amelia drove away from everything she knew. The leaves were falling like the pieces of her life, slow, quiet, and impossible to hold on to. Her marriage had ended with a note. Her mother was gone with a breath. Her job disappeared with an email. And her faith? Well, that had been the slowest to vanish. She didn't tell anyone where she was going, just tossed a few sweaters into the back seat, grabbed the keys to the old cabin, and left the city behind. There was no plan, no destination, just an ache too big to carry in silence any longer. The road twisted between pines and fading light, and for the first time in weeks, no one expected anything from her. No questions, no fixing, no pretending. Just the hum of tires on gravel and the whisper of the wind through cracked windows. When she arrived, the cabin still smelled like lavender and cedar, exactly like her grandmother used to. Dust hung in the sunlight like little ghosts. The door creaked open as if it remembered her, and in that quiet space, something stirred, something holy, something waiting. But Amelia didn't come for answers. She came to forget. And yet, some places don't let you forget. They help you remember what your soul was always longing for. If you've ever felt like the world fell apart around you and your prayers came back in silence, then stay with us. Because sometimes, it's only when we lose everything that we're finally ready to receive what heaven had saved all along. If this story already speaks to your heart, consider subscribing to our channel. And if you've ever faced a silent season like Amelia, share your story in the comments. You're not alone. She didn't know it would be the last normal morning. The coffee still bubbled in the pot. The radio still played the same soft gospel station. Amelia stood at the kitchen sink, watching the steam rise from her mug as the sun leaked through the slats of the blind. Her hands moved automatically, washing, rinsing, setting the dish aside. But something in the air felt different, like the stillness before a storm, or the hush before a heart cracks open. The first sign was the envelope. White, plain, folded under the front door. She thought it was another bill until she saw the handwriting. Daniel. Just her name on the outside, nothing else. No love, no sorry, just Amelia. She didn't open it right away. Her fingers trembled and her breath hitched in her chest. Somehow she already knew. Some part of her spirit whispered, "It's over." When she finally read it, it wasn't long. 4 sentences. Cold, precise, like a knife slid gently across skin. He wrote that he needed to be honest, that he had met someone else, that he didn't want to live a lie, and that she deserved someone better. That last line made her laugh, dry and bitter. "Better," she whispered. "Then what? A ghost?" She didn't cry. Not yet. She just stood in the middle of the living room, the letter in one hand, the silence growing louder around her. The framed photos on the mantel blurred. The ticking clock throbbed like a wound. She felt the floor under her feet, but her body went cold, numb, like grief had entered quietly and locked the door behind it. Then came the second blow, her phone vibrating with an email. The hospital had made cuts, restructuring, budget changes. "Your position has been eliminated," it read. Just like that. 10 years of night shifts, holidays, broken sleep, held hands of the dying, erased in one paragraph. Her badge would no longer open the employee door. Her name, no longer on the schedule. Her purpose, deleted. That night, Amelia sat on the edge of the bed, fully clothed, in the dark. The walls pressed in. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. She opened her Bible for the first time in weeks, but the words swam on the page like ink in water. Nothing stuck, nothing comforted. Even prayer felt foreign. like dialing a number she wasn't sure was still connected. She closed it and stared at her reflection in the darkened window. The woman looking back was tired, not just in her eyes, but in her bones. A woman who had tried to be strong for too long. A woman who whispered, "God, where are you?" Not in anger, not in rage, but in the quiet ache of someone who still hoped somehow he might answer. And that's when she remembered the cabin, not as a solution, but as a silence. A place where the world couldn't reach her, where she had once felt safe, cradled by woods and time. She didn't pack much, just a few clothes, the old keys, her Bible, and the memory of a voice that used to tell her, "When everything falls apart, you go back to where you first heard him." The morning she left, the sky was pale and breathless. No clouds, no color, just that cold tone of gray that feels like the world forgot to wake up. Amelia didn't say goodbye to anyone. She didn't leave a note, just locked the apartment, dropped the key in the mailbox slot, and got in the car. Her fingers trembled on the steering wheel. She didn't have a playlist or a map or even a real destination, just the memory of that old dirt road and the way the wind sounded through the trees. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, but her thoughts kept circling back to that one voice from childhood. Her grandmother used to say, "When life gets too loud, child, let the woods hush it for you." Amelia never really understood it, until now. She passed signs and exits and gas stations, none of which mattered. Time lost shape. The car hummed softly beneath her, and for the first time in days the tears came, slow and silent, tracing the edge of her jaw like they belonged there. She didn't wipe them, didn't hide them, just let them fall. Because sometimes crying isn't weakness, it's surrender. It's the soul admitting what the mind tried to bury, that things hurt, that dreams break, that faith fades, and that somewhere along the way she had lost herself in trying to hold everyone else together. The road narrowed as she entered the mountain. Pine trees leaned over the asphalt like old guardians, casting shifting shadows on the hood of the car. A fog rolled low over the hills, licking the edges of her windshield. There was no signal now. No phone calls, no text, just her, the sound of the engine, and a whisper deep inside that maybe, just maybe, this road led somewhere her heart needed to go. The turnoff was barely visible, a crooked wooden sign covered in moss, Cedar Creek. She slowed, blinked through the mist, and turned in. The gravel crunched under the tires as she took the winding path. Trees grew tighter together here, their branches knitting a canopy above, and somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard water flowing, a stream, a river. She wasn't sure, but it felt familiar, like a memory calling her name. The cabin appeared suddenly, hidden behind tall grass and brush. The same weathered porch, the same crooked chimney. The shutters hung slightly askew, but the place was still standing, like it had waited, for years, for her. Amelia parked the car and stepped out slowly, breathing in the scent of pine, damp earth, and something sweeter. Lavender? Her heart fluttered. Her grandmother used to dry lavender bundles on the porch rail. As she walked up the creaking steps, a gust of wind blew through the trees, sending a flurry of golden leaves around her feet. The key felt heavier than she remembered. She paused, hand on the doorknob, and whispered, "Please, let there still be something here worth finding." Not an answer, not a miracle, just something. The door opened with a long sigh, and the scent of time hit her like a wave. Wood, dust, and something sacred. She crossed the threshold slowly, not knowing that on the other side of that door, her life was about to be undone in the most holy way. The air inside wasn't stale. It was sacred. Amelia stepped in and felt it wrap around her like a forgotten prayer. The warmth wasn't from heat, but from memory. The wooden floor groaned beneath her boots, but the sound was familiar, like an old friend sighing in recognition. Dust floated in the air, illuminated by long beams of afternoon sunlight slicing through the blinds. And then she smelled it, faint but real, lavender. Her grandmother's scent still lingered, woven into the walls like a blessing. She walked through slowly, her fingers trailing along the edge of an old lace doily on the dining table. The chairs were still there, each one slightly different, just like her grandmother had collected them from garage sales over the years. A chipped blue mug sat on the shelf above the sink, her favorite, and above it, a tiny cross nailed into the wall, almost hidden by ivy that had started to creep through the window frame. Even the silence here had texture. It didn't feel empty. It felt expectant. In the corner of the living room, a crocheted blanket rested over the arm of a chair. She picked it up and pressed it to her face. It still smelled like sunlight and eucalyptus. That's when it hit her. She hadn't just missed her grandmother. She had missed being known, being seen without needing to explain anything. Here, in this space untouched by time, she felt like a version of herself she had forgotten existed. She found her way to the bedroom. The bed was made, though the linens were faded. A small wooden box sat on the dresser. She remembered it, her grandmother's prayer box. Inside were folded slips of paper tied with string. Her name was on one of them, just Amelia. No message, no date, just the name, written in soft, looping cursive, as if her grandmother had been praying for her even before she knew she'd need it. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding the slip of paper to her chest, and for the first time in weeks she let herself cry. Not the silent tears in the car or the hollow sobs in her apartment, but the kind of weeping that cleans something deeper than the eyes. The kind that makes room for grace, for healing, for God to speak again. The light began to shift outside, turning golden and soft. Shadows stretched across the wooden floors like reaching arms. She opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The forest greeted her with a hush. No traffic, no sirens, no voices. Just the rustle of leaves and a single bird call that echoed through the trees. For a moment, she stood barefoot, eyes closed, listening. Not for answers, but for presence. She whispered into the silence, "Are you still here?" She didn't expect a voice, but something in the stillness pressed into her chest, like an invisible hand saying, "Yes." Her breath caught. Maybe it wasn't the house that remembered. Maybe it was her soul, finally waking up. And then, just as she turned to go back inside, something on the bookshelf caught her eye. A notebook, leather-bound, worn, out of place. She stepped toward it slowly, unaware that what waited inside those pages would rewrite everything. She pulled the notebook from the shelf with careful fingers, like lifting something holy. The leather cover was cracked, corners frayed, but her name was etched faintly on the first page, Amelia Grace Whitmore. She hadn't written that. Her breath caught. Below it, in smaller script, was a note in her grandmother's handwriting. For when the silence becomes too loud, her knees went weak. She sat on the floor, back against the bookshelf, heart racing like a drum in a quiet church. The first page wasn't filled with writing. It held only a verse, Isaiah 43:2. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you." Underneath, her grandmother had added, "Don't fear the flood, my girl. The water won't drown you. It'll carry you." Amelia exhaled sharply, like the words had punched something deep in her chest. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, she felt the presence of someone kneeling beside her, not in body, but in spirit. She turned the page. Stories followed. Short, handwritten journal entries, moments of pain, doubt, surrender. Her grandmother had written about losing her husband, raising children alone, fighting illness. But each entry ended the same way, with a promise of God's nearness, with gratitude, even in brokenness. Amelia ran her fingers along the lines as if they were braille, trying to feel her way back to faith through someone else's scars. The cabin grew stiller as she read. Dust floated like holy ash through sunbeams. The clock had stopped ticking long ago, but time moved differently now, slow, sacred. Her stomach grumbled, but she didn't get up. She stayed there, turning page after page, feeding her soul instead. For the first time, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt discipled, like her grandmother had prepared this moment decades ago. Eventually, she stood and walked to the fireplace. On the mantel sat an old Bible, thick and worn, pages ruffled and notes scribbled in the margins. She opened it, and a dried flower fell out, pressed carefully between Psalms 22 and 23, her grandmother's favorite chapters. She smiled through tears. "Though I walk through the valley," she whispered. Her voice broke, but it wasn't weakness. It was reverence. She lit a small candle on the windowsill, the kind her grandmother used during prayer. Its flicker cast warm shadows on the wall. She wrapped herself in the crocheted blanket and sat on the rug in front of the fire, Bible in her lap. There was no music, no noise, just the steady rhythm of her breathing, the soft crackle of the wick, and the ache in her chest slowly giving way to something gentler. Then, in the corner of the shelf, nearly hidden beneath a stack of old hymnals, she saw a second notebook, smaller, red, with a ribbon bookmark hanging loose. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, not knowing that within its pages lay the first clue to something her grandmother had never spoken aloud. The red notebook was smaller, lighter, almost delicate. The ribbon was frayed at the end, as if someone had thumbed through it many times. Amelia untied the worn elastic holding it closed and opened to the marked page. There, in faded blue ink, was a single verse, centered, underlined, and surrounded by tiny pressed violets. Psalm 126:5. "Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy." She read it once, then again, and then she broke. The tears came so suddenly, so deeply, she didn't have time to brace. Her body folded over, arms wrapped around her knees. She wept into the crook of her elbow like a child, the kind of crying that had no words, just release. She wasn't sure why that verse, that moment. Maybe it was the violets, maybe it was the ink, the way it bled at the edges, or maybe it was that someone once believed she'd make it through. Someone believed she'd sing again. The room didn't feel empty while she cried. It felt held, as if the cabin itself exhaled with her. The scent of lavender seemed stronger now, mixing with the wax of the burning candle. The walls didn't echo her pain, they absorbed it. She felt, somehow, that the tears were not in vain, that maybe heaven had been waiting for them, not to punish, but to gather. When the sobs finally softened, she lay on her side on the rug, clutching the notebook to her chest. The verse played in her mind like a song she had forgotten she loved. She thought of all the years she had cried in silence, in bathrooms, in parked cars, in church pews after everyone had left, but no one had ever told her those tears meant something, that they were seeds, that joy could grow from them. She stood slowly and walked to the kitchen. There was still a jar of tea leaves in the cupboard, chamomile, probably 10 years old. She boiled water on the old stove and poured it into a cracked mug. As she sipped, a breeze moved through the window, brushing against her face like a whisper. Not wind, but warmth, as if grace had fingered. She carried the tea to the back porch and sat on the steps. The forest was quieter today. Even the birds seemed to pause. The light filtered gently through the trees, bathing everything in amber. She watched a squirrel scurry past, carrying something too big for its mouth. She smiled. "Same here, buddy," she murmured, "carrying more than I can handle." And yet, step by step, it kept moving forward. As she leaned her head back and closed her eyes, something deep within her stirred. Not peace, not yet, but a loosening, like her heart was unclenching for the first time in months. She thought again of the verse, the tears, the promise. She wasn't healed, but she was willing. And that's when she heard it. Footsteps, slow, measured, approaching the edge of the porch. Her eyes snapped open. No one should be out here. No one knew she had come. And yet, as she turned toward the sound, a voice broke the silence. One she hadn't heard in years. She froze. Her heart skipped, then pounded. The sound was unmistakable. Footsteps on gravel just beyond the trees. Amelia slowly set her mug down, stood, and stepped toward the edge of the porch. Her breath came in shallow waves. Every instinct told her to be afraid, but something deeper said no. The wind shifted slightly, and in that shift came a voice, soft, gentle, familiar. "You still walk barefoot like your grandmother used to?" She blinked, stunned. A tall man emerged from the trees, older now, beard grayer, eyes lined with time, but she knew that voice. Elijah Mercer, her grandmother's oldest friend, her childhood Sunday school teacher, a man who had vanished from the church after his wife died, just disappeared. She hadn't seen him in over a decade. "How did you know I was here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, tilted his head. "She told me to come." Elijah walked slowly, every step deliberate, as if he were careful not to startle the ground. He carried something wrapped in cloth. "I've been keeping something," he said, lifting it gently into her hand. The fabric was warm from the sun. Inside were letters, dozens, yellowed, sealed, some still marked in red wax. Amelia stared, eyes wide. "She wrote these?" He nodded. "All for you," she said. "You'd need them someday." Inside the cabin, the light had shifted again, now a golden hush spilling across the floor. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same one her grandmother used to set with chipped plates and cinnamon rolls. Elijah's hands trembled slightly as he handed her the first envelope. "Start with that one," he said. "She wrote it the week she passed." Amelia peeled the wax seal gently. Her fingers shook, but her soul was still. The letter began with, "My dearest Amelia, if you are reading this, then the world has gotten too loud again." She felt her eyes sting instantly. Her grandmother wrote of grief, of loss, of her own battles with silence, but she also wrote of promises, visions, prayers whispered over Amelia's cradle, of a verse she felt God had given just for her. John 16:20, "You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy." Tears slid quietly down her cheeks as she read. Elijah remained silent, hands folded, eyes soft. He didn't speak because he didn't have to. He had seen people return to God through many paths, but few as sacred as grief. He finally broke the silence. "You're not here by accident, Amelia." She knew this moment would come. Amelia nodded, unable to speak. Her heart was full, but still aching. She read 3 more letters that night, each one more intimate than the last. Each felt like her grandmother was sitting beside her, whispering through time. They spoke of things Amelia hadn't yet lived, things she feared, things she had buried, and yet each letter ended the same way. "He is still with you, even now." The words sank deep, like seeds falling into freshly turned soil. When Elijah stood to leave, the sun was gone. Only candlelight and moonbeams lit the cabin now. "I'll come again," he said, pausing at the door. "But next time, it won't be just for delivering letters." Amelia tilted her head, confused, but he didn't explain. He smiled, touched the doorframe reverently, and whispered, "You'll see." Then he disappeared into the woods, leaving behind a silence so heavy with mystery, it almost hummed. That night, Amelia didn't sleep much, not because of fear, but because something inside her had stirred too deeply to rest. She lay in bed, eyes open, staring at the wooden ceiling as if it were a sky filled with invisible stars. The candle by her window had long since gone out, but she could still smell its faint wax and cinnamon. She clutched the last letter to her chest and whispered, "What do I do now?" The question didn't echo. It sank. She rose before the sun, wrapped in her grandmother's blanket, and stepped outside. The grass was wet with dew. The air was cold but clean, pure, like the breath of God after a long silence. She didn't have words, just presence. She stood still, arms at her sides, heart cracked wide open. No thoughts, no form, just being. And somehow, that was enough. She felt like her breath had become a prayer. No structure, no request, just surrender. She remembered how complicated prayer used to feel. The right words, the proper posture, the fear of not being heard. But here, in this simplicity, her breathing felt holy. Each inhale, mercy. Each exhale, release. As the sky shifted from gray to gold, she began to whisper again, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. "Thank you for not forgetting me." It was all she said, but it was everything. Inside the cabin, she knelt in the corner where the light hit strongest. The old Bible lay open, its pages ruffled like feathers. Her fingers landed on Psalm 40. "I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry." Tears came again, not out of sorrow, but recognition. She wasn't crying for anything anymore. She was crying with someone, and that changed everything. She sat on the floor for hours, reading scripture aloud, letting it echo softly off the wooden walls. There was no performance, no urgency, just communion, like meeting an old friend in the silence and realizing he had been waiting all along. The kind of quiet that holds rather than empties. The kind of presence that doesn't need proof. Later, while sweeping the porch, she found something lodged between the floorboards, a tiny wooden cross, child-sized, rough around the edges, handmade. She remembered it. She had carved it with her grandmother one summer when she was 10. Her initials were faintly scratched into the back. She smiled and pressed it to her lips, whispering, "I still believe." The hours passed slowly, filled with small tasks that felt like rituals, boiling tea, lighting candles, folding old linens, but none of it was empty. Each moment carried weight, purpose. She found herself humming again, then singing, old hymns, simple verses, at first quietly, then stronger, not for show, for healing. That afternoon, as she sat under the trees with the Bible in her lap, the wind shifted again, and in that shift, she heard it, a melody, distant, delicate, like a piano playing through time. Her grandmother's favorite song, but there was no one else around. No speaker, no music box, just the forest, the breeze, and a sound only the soul could hear. The music faded as gently as it came. Amelia sat still, eyes closed, unsure if it had been real or if her heart had simply remembered. Either way, it left her with a strange peace, a peace not earned, not explained, just given. She opened her eyes, the leaves above her glowing with filtered sunlight. And then, from the edge of the woods, she saw him, a man, watching, silent, unfamiliar, and yet, somehow, not. He stepped slowly into the clearing, tall, lean, eyes tired but kind. He wore a coat too warm for the weather and boots covered in dust. His hands stayed at his sides, empty. "You're Amelia," he said softly. She froze. "Yes," she replied. Her voice barely carried. "How do you know me?" The man hesitated, then smiled gently. "Your grandmother used to talk about you every Sunday. She said you'd find your way here when the world grew too heavy." Something inside her shifted. That ache, that longing, that invisible thread connecting her past to her present. She stepped forward cautiously. "Were you from the church?" He nodded. "Once, long ago. I left after she passed. Couldn't stay in a place so full of her voice." His eyes clouded. "But I never forgot what she said about you, that you'd carry a storm, but one day you'd become the calm." Amelia looked down, unsure what to say. The wind picked up around them, lifting leaves in a soft dance between them. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "She told me to give you this, only if I saw you again. I didn't think I ever would." Her hands trembled as she took it. The envelope was pale blue, sealed with wax. The same seal from the other letters, a tiny olive branch. She opened it slowly. The letter was short. Just one verse written in her grandmother's familiar hand, 2 Corinthians 4:16. "Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day." Underneath it, "He knows your name, child, and so do those who've been watching from the edge of your wilderness." The man stepped back. "I don't live far. I just pass through sometimes. But I felt something today, like I needed to come." She wanted to ask more, but the moment felt fragile, like something you don't chase, you just receive. He tipped his head. "Don't be afraid of the quiet anymore. It's where he speaks the loudest." And just like that, he turned, walking back into the trees, disappearing as quietly as he'd arrived. She stood alone again, but she wasn't the same. Something had taken root, something unshakable. She clutched the letter to her chest and whispered, "You see me?" Not the man, not her grandmother, but God. For the first time in so long, she felt truly known. As she returned to the cabin, a shadow passed over the sun and a breeze lifted the pages of the red notebook still on the table. It stopped on a page she hadn't turned to yet, and there, in fresh ink, was a verse she hadn't written. She stared at the notebook in disbelief. The ink was fresh, darker than all the others. The verse written on the page was simple but powerful, Romans 8:28. "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him." But beneath it, there was no signature, no handwriting to match, just the words, clear, purposeful, waiting. Amelia's heart raced. She flipped to the previous pages. Nothing. No fresh ink, no notes, just that single message, as if heaven had left her a reminder through paper and ink. She sat down slowly, notebook open in her lap, fingers trembling. Could someone have written it while she was outside? No. The door had stayed locked. Elijah hadn't returned, and the stranger, he was already gone. Still, something told her. It wasn't about who, it was about why. The verse didn't promise explanation. It promised presence, purpose, redemption, not in the form of return, but in transformation. That realization struck her harder than any loss had. God wasn't rebuilding her old life. He was building something entirely new. He hadn't brought Daniel back. Her job wasn't reinstated. Her mother was still gone. But she was no longer the same woman who had arrived at that cabin. The hollow places had become sacred. The silence had become sanctuary. And the pain, though still tender, had a name now, meaning. She walked to the porch barefoot again and looked out over the trees. They were beginning to change, small hints of gold and fire red among the green. Autumn was coming in slow waves. A new season, a quiet shift. Her fingers brushed the wooden railing as she exhaled deeply, feeling both lighter and more rooted than she ever had. Not because things were fixed, but because she had stopped demanding that they be. Later that afternoon, she opened the final envelope Elijah had brought. It was thicker than the rest. Inside was a list, written in her grandmother's hand, of the promises of God, numbered 1 through 30. At the bottom, a note. "Read one each day, child. Don't rush. Let him walk with you slowly." Tears pooled again, not from sadness, from being seen. She began to read the first one aloud. "I will never leave you nor forsake you." The words filled the room like fragrance. She felt them soak into her skin, into the air, into the very beams of the house. Her breath slowed, her eyes softened. She felt carried, not away from the pain, but through it. Like the waters she once feared were now parting before her feet. That evening, she cooked for the first time since arriving. Nothing fancy, just soup and bread, but it felt sacred. She set the table for two like her grandmother used to, even though she was alone. And as she bowed her head in prayer, she whispered, "I lost so much, but you never left." Her voice broke again, not in weakness, but in worship. Her healing wasn't loud, it was slow, holy, quiet like the turning of seasons. And as the last light of day slipped behind the hills, Amelia felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Expectation, not for what had been, but for what could be. The grief hadn't been erased, but it had been named, loved. And just as she stood to blow out the candle, someone knocked at the door. She froze at the sound. A knock, gentle, rhythmic, echoed through the wooden cabin like a pulse. Amelia stood slowly, unsure whether to call out or just open the door. Her heart beat steady, not in fear, but in wonder. When she turned the knob, the wind moved through the trees behind her like a choir. And there, on the porch, stood Elijah, smiling, holding something wrapped in brown paper. "I thought you'd want this," he said softly, handing it to her. "She asked me to bring it only after the last letter." Amelia took the package carefully. It was heavier than she expected. She invited him in, the candlelight flickering behind her. He stepped inside, nodding toward the table set for two. "Seems I'm right on time." She smiled, eyes damp. "You always were." Inside the package was a frame, wooden, worn, but behind the glass was a photograph, one she had never seen. Her grandmother, younger than she remembered, holding a newborn Amelia on her lap, both smiling, both glowing. Attached to the corner was a handwritten note. "You were my answered prayer. Now let him be yours." Amelia pressed her hand to her mouth, her breath catching like a hymn held too long. They ate in silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because words weren't needed, the kind of silence that holds presence, memory, redemption. After the meal, Elijah stood and placed a small cross on the table. "That's yours now," he said. "She wanted you to have it when your faith stopped limping and started walking again." Amelia laughed softly through her tears. "I think I'm just crawling," she said. Elijah smiled. "Even a crawl is progress." Later that night, Amelia stepped outside alone. The stars above the trees blinked like promises. She looked up and whispered, "Thank you for not giving me back what I lost, but for giving me what I didn't know I needed." Her voice trembled, but not from pain, from reverence, from healing, from hope that was no longer distant but alive inside her chest. The cabin wasn't just a place anymore. It was an altar, a holy ground, where her ashes became soil, where surrender made room for something better than answers, presence. She still had questions, still had scars, but she no longer feared the silence. She welcomed it, because in the stillness, she had finally heard him again. Amelia picked up the red notebook, added a new page, and wrote her own verse at the top. Isaiah 61:3. "To give them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, and a garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness." She smiled, closed it gently, and placed it on the windowsill for someone else, someday. Because healing isn't meant to be hoarded. It's meant to be passed on. And as the candle flickered behind her and the first leaf of autumn touched the ground, she realized something beautiful. She hadn't come to the cabin to be rescued. She had come to remember she was never forgotten. If this story spoke to your soul, we invite you to subscribe to our channel and share where you're watching from. And if you've ever walked through a silent season, tell us how God met you in the quiet. You are not alone.